Hey guys! This is Cartoon Recapped. Today, we'll show you a 2018 family adventure cartoon called Thomas and Friends, Big World, Big Adventure. Be aware of heavy spoilers. Sit back and enjoy the show. Thomas always wonders to travel the world, especially after that his partner, Gordon, mocks him for not being able to do his daily tasks. An Australian rally car follows a dirt road towards the Vickerstown Bridge alongside the Flying Scotsman. He wants to reach Sodor. At Knapford, the Fat Controller asks Thomas to take some stinking fish trucks to Vickerstown, which Thomas reluctantly agrees. However, instead of taking them, he couples them to Gordon's Express, as he is headed to Vickerstown. As a revenge for what he said to him earlier. The rally car continues along the dirt road to Farquhar. He later meets Thomas in the way and introduces himself as Ace. Thomas expresses his own desire to see the world, but points out that he has to follow the rails. Ace assures that rails exist all over the world and that he could be the first railway engine to travel the world. Ace tells him that is scheduled to take part in a continental rally race over 5 different continents. Thomas asks if it is starting on Sodor, which Ace dismisses and says it starts in Africa, and that he is on Sodor to take a ship there. Encouraged by Ace's words, Thomas presents the idea of traveling the world to the Fat Controller, who shares his enthusiasm. This makes Thomas to make his way to the sheep in order to reach Africa. Thomas' suddenly disappearance makes everybody worry, and the Fat Controller starts to look for him. He later asks Carly at Brendam Docks, who explains that she loaded Thomas onto a ship bound for Africa. Thomas travels with Ace to Senegal in Africa, where they continue their journey through the Sahara Desert. Once they arrive at the race starting line, the other rally cars laugh at the idea of Thomas having joined Ace to see the world. Ace argues that he never said that they were going together and that rails do not exist everywhere, much to Thomas's dismay. He leaves the scene as the race starts, before arriving at a yard and gets couples up to some trucks. Despite the yard manager's uncertainty of him being able to pull so many trucks, Thomas continues. As he goes, more and more trucks are coupled to his train, really showing the size of it. Thomas arrives at yet another yard, where an orange tank engine laughs at him and offers to help him, which he dismisses, determined that he can manage by himself. However, once he reaches a steep hill, the orange engine arrives to help. She introduces herself as Nia, and decides to tag along with him. As they arrive in Dar es Salaam, the Fat Controller arrives in Senegal, asking around for Thomas. He eventually accepts the offer of traveling with camels through the Sahara Desert, but becomes skeptical of the possibility of Thomas having traveled through there, since there are no rails. In Dar es Salaam, Nia meets her friend, Kwaku. Thomas asks him about Ace and Kwaku explains that the rally cars left on a ship bound for Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Both Thomas and Nia are loaded onto another ship going to Brazil, but halfway there, Thomas discovers that Ace is in fact on their ship. He encourages Thomas to be more independent and decide for himself what he wants to do and not let any baggage drag him down. As they arrive in Rio, the Fat Controller reaches Dar es Salaam, again asking around for Thomas. A crane tells him that he loaded Thomas on a ship bound for Rio, much to the Fat Controller's dismay. In Brazil, Ace heads out to his race in the Amazon rainforest and Thomas decides to follow him. However, he is not allowed to fill up on coal without having to leave with a train. He accepts to take a train of coffee to San Francisco, with Nia tagging along to help him. They eventually encounter the race cars, and Thomas is determined to follow them. Nia tries to advise to fill up on water, but he ignores her. The rally cars later disappear for some time, before Thomas and Nia find Ace flipped onto his roof. Ace is loaded onto their train and they continue through the rainforest. Eventually, Thomas runs out of water. Nia suggests that they could make a funnel out of leaves in order to take on rainwater in their tanks, which their drivers do. Once filled up, they continue their journey. The Fat Controller arrives in Rio de Janeiro and asks a diesel engine about Thomas. He confirms that he has seen him and that he was taking a train to San Francisco. He later sees a billboard sponsoring a plane, which he later flies with over the Amazon, looking for Thomas, without success. Thomas, Nia, and Ace eventually reach the United States, heading into the Grand Canyon in Arizona. Ace later challenges them to a race, teasing them about not being able to drive separately. Thomas and Nia agree, and each take 2 parts of the train respectively. The 2 swap leads in the beginning, until Ace asks Thomas that they play a trick on Nia, which he agrees to. They take a different track along the cliff sides, which Ace explains leads to the Salt Flats, where the next race is scheduled to be held. They pass an elderly tender engine, whose trucks detach and collide into theirs as they enter an old railroad mine and come through on the other side, derailing. The elderly tender engine later arrives, and Thomas asks him to fetch the breakdown train, which he is confused over. He explains that in the desert, they only use man and horsepower when trains derail, or at worst, they are just left to rust. He departs, much to Thomas's dismay. The Fat Controller arrives in San Francisco ahead of Thomas. He finds a diesel, who tells him that an orange tank engine delivered coffee from Brazil earlier. Defeated, the Fat Controller settles in at a local sailor's cafe. The elderly tender engine arrives the next morning with cowboys, cowgirls, and horses, to help rerail Ace, Thomas, and his train. Thomas thanks the engine, before departing for the Salt Flats. As they arrive at the flats, Thomas changes his mind about seeing the world, and is now determined to find and apologize to Nia for the trick they played on her. Thomas eventually arrives in San Francisco and delivers his trucks. He asks a diesel shunter, Natalie, if she has seen Nia, which she confirms, and that she was loaded onto a ship headed for China. Arriving in China, Thomas begins to long for his friendship with Nia. As he reverses into a yard with some coaches, Yongbao arrives at the station and recognizes him. As he describes Nia, a Chinese diesel comes past and tells him that Nia was headed to the Rainbow Mountains. Thomas rushes up the snowy mountains and eventually spots Nia further up. He decides to apologize, which she finally decides to believe. Suddenly, a snow avalanche occurs and derails Nia, sending her down to Thomas's tracks, before resting on the cliff. Thomas tries to save her himself, but quickly realizes that he cannot do it. Just then, Yongbao arrives and saves Thomas from doing so on his own and helps him remain steady on the tracks. After Nia is back on the tracks, Yongbao asks them where they are headed. Thomas replies that they would be heading back to Sodor. Thomas and Nia head back to Sodor via other countries before arriving on the mainland and then heading to the Vickerstown Bridge. They stop on the mainland side and Thomas states that Nia should head home. She explains that her old shed is no more and that her home is not worthy of being a home anymore. Thomas concludes that she could settle down on Sodor and that the Fat Controller would accept it. As they arrive at Knapford, all the other engines, along with the Thin Controller, welcome them. However, the Thin Controller and Percy question why the Fat Controller is not with him. Thomas is surprised that he went looking for him, while the now exhausted Fat Controller is now traveling on a ship to China, now asking if he has seen Thomas, which Ace overhears. Thanks for watching. Hope you all enjoyed, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.